A very warm good morning to one and all present here. My name is Nooria Siddiqui. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to another insightful session organized by the Department of English. Today, we will be exploring one of the most exciting periods in drama, that is, Victorian drama. To guide us through this era, we are privileged to have us an esteemed scholar, Miss Angela Qureshi. She is a research scholar at Jagran Lake City University, Bhopal, and has demonstrated academic excellence by qualifying SET in 2022 and NET in 2024. Her deep engagement with literature and passion for theatrical studies make her the perfect speaker for today's session. We welcome you, ma'am.
The topic that we are going to encapsulate is majorly Victorian drama, but that comes under the purview of the Victorian age. So we have to focus on that first because we cannot study or explore literature in isolation. We have to take into account the history, the geography, and the politics of the topic as well. Right. So before we begin, I would like you guys to give me like an overview of your understanding of the Victorian age. Have you been exposed to that yet? Do you have any idea of sorts? All right. So the Victorian age. Historical perspective of the Victorian age. Now, the Victorian age is an age of British history spanning the 64-year reign of Queen Victoria, as we can guess from the name. And the time period is really important. This makes for a very important and interesting question of UGC NET, MP SET, even MPPSC AP for that matter, or PhD entrances. So please take into consideration the timeline for this age and other ages for that matter. So the Queen Victoria's reign was from 1837 to 1901, and roughly that is the time that is known as the Victorian age or the Victorian era or the Victorian period in the context of British literature or British history per se. Right, it is one of the longest reigns in the history of English literature or England per se. Now, in the year 1837, Queen Victoria succeeded William IV. Right, so the predecessors and the successors are also very important because that determines who was ruling when. So Queen Victoria had succeeded William IV, which means before Queen Victoria, William IV was ruling on the throne of Great Britain and Ireland. At that point of time, these countries were together, then eventually they separated. The period is marked by many important social and historical changes that altered the nation in many ways. Now, as we can expect, the history and the geography and the politics, as I said earlier, are very important because they shape the literature of the nation as it shapes the face of the demographic or the fabric of the nation as well. So that is what is reflected in the literature of a particular time too. Now, the population got nearly doubled. So this was the time when the population was flourishing and the British Empire was also expanding under the new ruler. The period saw the British Empire grow to become the first global industrial power. So this was when Manchester and London in England were gaining prominence, and there was a lot of commerce and trade that was going on. Right, so this was a time of a lot of, I would say, expansion and growth and success. And she was a very good queen, and she had done a lot for the nation. So producing much of the world's coal, iron, steel, and textiles, by this time the role of the monarch was to reign rather than to rule. Okay, now moving forth, we see historical perspective of the Victorian period. The period is known for its economic... just a second. The period is known for economic progress, but also there was poverty and exploitation. So while we see that Manchester was becoming the kind of say the commercial center of the world, so to say, and London was also gaining prominence along the similar lines, we could see a lot of child labor was going on. A lot of women and men were being exploited in the name of success and growth. So that was also going on, and a lot of literature has also been written along the similar lines. Now, the gap between the rich and poor was growing wide as well. And with drive for material and commercial success, there appeared a kind of moral decay in the society. All right. So, since the country was gaining prominence and there was a lot of people who were lusting over the materialism of it and the commercial success of it, there was also a sense of moral decay in the society. The Victorian era saw a wild growth of industries and factories. So, of course, there was a lot of industrialization that was going on. One very important factor of the age was its stress on morality. So while there was a lot of immorality going on, there was a stress in literature on morality as well. A feminine code of conduct was imposed on them, which described every aspect of their being, from the proper apparels or dress or to how to converse, basically how to talk. So everything had rules. So this could be explored through a feminist point of view as well. The role of women was mostly that of being angels of the house, so to say, because like they were in the confines of the house, they had to take care of the house, and not much financial freedom or freedom of any other sort. And they were basically restricted to domestic confines. Now, this was also the time when a lot of women wanted to write, but there were no rights per se to write. Right. So a lot of women had begun to write under the pseudonyms, which basically means under the false names. And a lot of women had taken the names of male writers as well. For example, George Eliot, if you notice, George is a name of a man, but George Eliot was actually a woman by the name of Mary Ann Evans, right? So these were also the things that were happening. And if we talk about education as well, even when Cambridge University was the center of education and arts and all things fancy, it took a lot of time for women to enter this and enter the university as students as well. They were financially, so women were financially dependent on their husbands and fathers, and it led to a commercialization of the institution of marriage as well. Right, and I believe not much has changed, although we have kind of grown a bit, but we still need to do better. Right, so talking particularly about the Victorian society, a lot of emphasis was placed on the institution of marriage, because women practically had no rights, especially financial rights, and they had to depend upon their husbands and the fathers. They could practically do nothing without their help and support. And if you recall watching Pride and Prejudice or reading it, one of the major episodes from the novel was that women were not allowed to inherit the property as well of their own biological father. If there was no male heir to the family, the property had to be shifted to the nearest or the closest male cousin. So that's how the society was. And of course, there was a lot of injustice which was reflected in the literature of the time as well. Now, talking about the characteristics of Victorianism, so the discoveries of science have particular effects upon the literature of the Victorian age. So with a lot of industrialization and growth and success in the society, science was also gaining prominence. A lot of discoveries and inventions were happening, and earlier in the days, people used to believe in the institution of religion and church, and God was the center and church was the center of the universe. But then with the science gaining prominence and everything, man had begun to be the center of the universe, and obviously it was very shocking, because it was like a very strong I would say shock and strong wave going on, because once the center shifts, once there's a paradigm shift, of course it's very, very shocking, because there are all kinds of people who believed in the religion and people who believed in the institution of church, while there were a lot of people who had begun to believe in the power of man and the power of science. So of course there was a lot of resistance and radicalism and tussle between different kinds of extremes of the spectrum, so to say. So it is simple to mark the following four general characteristics. The first one was realism. If you are exposed to Victorian literature, you would come across realism, and majorly in the works of Charles Dickens. So, literature of this age comes closer to daily life, which reflects its practical problems and interests. It becomes a powerful instrument for human progress. Now, simply realism basically means the reflection of the real human issues and the real human problems and the real human life in literature. Nothing fancy or I would say fictional. Right. So a lot of people had begun to write about the real issues of the contemporary society to kind of, I would say, to kind of talk about and solve the issues, because education had gained prominence and people were becoming aware. Right. So it had become like a powerful instrument for human progress. Now, second was moral purpose. The Victorian literature seems to assert its moral purpose. Tennyson, Browning, Carlyle, Ruskin, all were the teachers of England with the faith in their moral message to instruct the world. Now, majorly there have been two kinds of literary scholars or writers per se. Scholars who believe in the moral aspect of literature and scholars who believe that it's for pleasure and fun, right? And well, both are true. So if we talk about this literary canon in particular, Lord Alfred Tennyson, Browning, Carlyle, Ruskin, these were the teachers of England with the faith in their moral message. So they wanted to write from a moral point of view, and it was reflected in their works as well. So very important writers, and the works of Carlyle in particular, and Tennyson and Browning as well have been asked in the exams. So make sure that you go through their works in detail, particularly Thomas Carlyle. And of course, as I keep on saying, I've said that in the formal lectures as well, just make sure that you are concentrating on the hierarchy and the chronology of the dates. Super important. It's just trending in the net world at the moment. Now, moving forth, we see doubts or contradictory faiths and philosophies as well. Okay, now, of course, when, as I said earlier, there's a center, people believe in a certain way of life, and then when that changes, of course, there are a lot of kind of factors that are pulling the society apart, right? So there's bound to be doubts, and there's bound to be contradictory points of view. So there were a lot of people who were believing in science. There were a lot of people who were believing in religion. So of course, there was a tussle that was going on, and it was reflected in the literature as well. So it is often considered as an age of doubt and contradictory faiths and philosophies. The influence of science is felt here. Browning the optimist, Hardy the pessimist, okay, makes for a very good question, right? So Robert Browning was an optimist and Thomas Hardy the pessimist. So if you come across Thomas Hardy's works, they are majorly pessimistic works in nature. So are regarded as most popular writers of the age. This is realistic literature with pre-Raphaelite poetry that believes in art for art's sake. Okay, all right. Are you familiar with this phrase? Have you come across this before? Could you just enlighten me? Art for art's sake, what could this mean?
I mean, I'm not sure, but wasn't it used to just say that not everything should have a meaning, and art can just stand for its beauty and should not really have a moral value on its very own?
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. Is there anyone who wants to add something more? So this comes from French phrase l'art pour d'art, which means art for art's sake, which essentially has its standing in the decadence or the aestheticism movement that started back in the day in France, right? Which means that art should purely be done for the pleasure of it, for the poetry of it, for the truth of it. There's no moral compass, there's no morality to art, there is nothing that we are seeking, we are just doing it for the sake of it, purely for the sake of art, right? So that is what it essentially meant. And as I said earlier, a lot of people did not agree with that, a lot of people agreed with that. So that was the kind of tussle that was going on, that was the conflict that was going on. Now, the next characteristic of the Victorian era was idealism. Though the age is characterized as practical and materialistic, Most of the writers suggest a purely ideal life. It is an idealistic age where the great ideas like truth, justice, love, brotherhood are emphasized by poets, essayists, and novelists of the age. So, majorly, basically everything was everyone was writing about everything. So there was a lot of focus on the materialism because it was very new to the world and people had begun to kind of like it, right? At the same time, a lot of people subscribed to this canon where they believed in the idea of truth, justice, love, brotherhood as well. Now, moving forth, we see the growth of Victorian age. So, after the Romantic revival, so majorly, let's go back to the Romantic age. Just give me the characteristics. What do you recall from the Romantic age? What were the tenets? What were the characteristic traits of the Romantic age? Also, could you recall a few writers as well?
I mean, I would say that romantic age was more romantic age. We get to see more emphasis on natural beauty rather than reason. We get to see John Keats and his masterpiece Ode to Nightingale. We get to see him focusing on the more imagination part rather than reality, and him trying to just forget the reality, but him just coming back to it in the later half. We also get to see works by some pre-romantics like William Blake, where we get to see him criticizing the societal nature and how there are so many problems related to child labor and all.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's the basic of it.
Very good. Thank you for that. All right. Do you guys want to add something else? Do you recall anything in particular from the Romantic age? Something that caught your eye?
I think Romantic age also saw a return to the past where people were because of the Augustan age, people were leaning towards reasoning and morality and stuff. And with the Romantic era, the emotions and nature came back in trend again.
Very good. Yes. Amazing. So right now we're talking about Victorian age, and this was the time right after the Romantic age. So obviously Romantic age had an influence, a very strong one at that. Right? And when we talk about Romantic age in particular, not a lot of reason, not a lot of focus on conventions or rules. Almost, I mean, I believe all the writers were focusing on the nature, truth, love, poetry. They did not believe in any boundaries per se. They talked a lot about imagination, and they lived in such romantic settings that was also reflected in their works. Like if you talk about Wordsworth, Coleridge, and Southey in particular, they lived in Lake District in England, which is a very, very beautiful, very natural setting. And other ode writers for that matter as well. They were radicals of sorts as well, and they talked about the real life, the poetry of it, the beauty of it, right? And then we have the Victorian age where after the Romantic revival, the literature of the Victorian age entered in a new period. The literature of this period expressed the fusion of romanticism to realism. The Victorian age is rich in literature. It produced two great poets like Tennyson and Browning, dramatists like Shaw and Galsworthy, novelists like Charles Dickens and Hardy, and essayists like Carlyle and Stevenson. So all of these writers are very important. The age is remarkable for the excellence of its literature. So all of them have written seminal pieces of literature, commendable works. Now, all kinds of literature and all kinds of genres were explored in this period in particular. So if we talk about Victorian prose, per se, Victorian age produced two great essays like Carlyle and Stevenson. Carlyle's major works include The French Revolution in 3 volumes, so 1837. Very, very important, a very prominent question in UGC NET, so make sure that you go through the dates. On heroes, hero worship, and the heroic in history again has been asked. So make sure that you go through this as well. 1841. His prose style differs from other prose writers. He writes about people and events of the past. He has his own philosophy. He accounts great men as hero, whereas Stevenson writes famous essays in this period. A Night Among the Pines, Walking Tours, An Apology for Idlers, A Plea for Gas Lamps, El Dorado, Familiar Studies of Men, Books in Crabbed Age and Youth being some of the works. Stevenson's essays are an attempt in the direction of human welfare. So just like every writer has their way of writing, has their favorite theme or subject, for Stevenson it was human welfare. He wishes to remove all that creates obstacle in human progress and happiness. So in a lot of ways, then he is a utopian. For example, in his famous essay, An Apology for Idlers, he points out the importance of direct education based on self-observation and self-learning. He puts stress on the quality of being happy for personal sake as well as social sake. All right. Makes for a very interesting study. So I don't know, but I'm sure you guys must be familiar with this idea of homeschooling as opposed to like the rest of us who've been schooled in schools who have been schooled at schools, right? So what is your take on homeschooling? Are you in favor, and are you not sure of it? What do you say? Homeschooling, what are the pros and cons, if you could just walk me through that?
I mean, I personally believe that homeschooling can be much more better because there's, every time that, I mean, all of us, I think most of us would have been like normally school, like daily school we go to, and we always have this burden of assignments and so many deadlines. And
True.
I think homeschooling can be much more better than that, but also there's a very big con of it that many times people who go for homeschooling end up not having that good of a social intelligence, and they have a sense of social anxiety which gets inbuilt in them. So I mean, it's something which has pros and cons at the same time, I would say.
Amazing. Perfect. Yes. What else? Others?
Ma'am, according to me, in homeschooling, we will not able to grow properly. We will not able to communicate. We will not able to express our opinion, have public speaking skills. So this will result in negativity.
Okay, makes sense. Perfect. Yes. Sarah, do you have anything to add?
I think if homeschooling is done correctly, the child can be like much more enriched with knowledge. That is what I personally think. But if not done correctly, of course, the child will fall behind. But also the thing is, ki if we study in schools, we interact with a lot of different people. We make contacts with a lot of different people. And we get to know a lot about the society and things that are going on. So I think schooling is much better because it also gives us a sense of companionship. So that's why I think schooling is better.
So basically, both the modes have their own pros and cons. So when we talk about the conventional mode of schooling, of course, social intelligence, emotional intelligence, we learn how to work, and we learn collaboration, how to work in a team. Right. Yeah. So I was just saying both the modes have their own pros and cons. And if we talk about the conventional mode of schooling that we had been exposed to, it did teach us a lot about life. And also it did not teach us a lot about life, I would say, because when we had issues with our friends or classmates or teachers, it did teach us about how to resolve the conflicts. And of course, there was a social life every day. So we learned about the social life as well. There was a sense of emotional intelligence as well. Different aspects about life that we learned from our teachers and classmates as well. And of course, through books and whatever sort of practical education that we were exposed to. But at the same time, if we talk about homeschooling per se, there's not a lot of baggage and burden, and that's such a big relief because the child is able to flow naturally. And travel in particular is my favorite mode of education. Like when kids just go and explore the world, they are able to learn everything at their own pace, which is amazing. And learning without a sense of burden is just truly remarkable. At the same time, there are no set boundaries. You can practically learn about anything and everything. So that is one thing that is just quite commendable. And since there is no sense of boundary or exams or tests for that matter, you can just be an early learner of things that you usually tend to learn late in life when it comes to conventional mode. So both the modes, as I said, have pros and cons. Okay, now coming back to Victorian poetry. So produce great poets. So Tennyson, Browning, and Arnold, amazing works. Browning is just one of my favorites, and Matthew Arnold again is just really amazing. So Tennyson is the most representative poet of the age. He was Lord Alfred Tennyson, so he was the poet laureate as well of England. All the, I would say, major poets, major writers were heralded all these titles. So Tennyson was one of the title holders. He represents Victorian conflict and compromise. So now when we talk about Victorian literature, there's this really representative term that comes about, which is Victorian compromise. Basically, it means being at the center of conflicts, or being at the center of the spectrum of different extremes, right? So he was a great lyric poet. His lyricism is deep rooted and dominates all of his poems. It makes his poetry smooth and sweet. His lyric can be divided into many parts, like personal, dramatic, patriotic, musical lyrics, or songs. Among Tennyson's personal lyric, In Memoriam is very important. Yeah, so this is also very important for UGC NET. And I don't know whether it's UPSC English Literature optional or MPPSC assistant professor for that matter. I think this poem is also a part of that syllabus. So yeah, super important. It is a collection of lyrics composed on the death of his bosom friend Arthur Hallam. Yeah, makes for a very interesting, important question. I think this has been asked somewhere as well. Tennyson's dramatic lyrics are in the form of dramatic monologues, very interesting form of literature. Tennyson is admired as a pictorial artist. His description of the nature is highly sensuous. Robert Browning is known for his dramatic monologues and philosophy of hope. Browning is the greatest writer of dramatic monologues. All of his monologues deal with different aspects of love. Arnold is regarded as the greatest elegiac poet of Victorian age. He contributes a number of elegies, but the following 5 are of great merit. So yeah, Thyrsis, Rugby Chapel, The Scholar Gypsy, Southern Night, Westminster Abbey. Okay, now talking about Victorian drama. Drama happens to be my most favorite genre. It produced 2 great dramatists like Shaw and Galsworthy. Shaw is doubtlessly the greatest of all dramatists of this period. He contributed anti-romantic plays of ideas like Candida and Apple Cart, important works. St. John won Nobel Prize for him. So yeah, he was a Nobel Prize laureate. Galsworthy is also a great dramatist. He's a problem play writer. He has deep sympathy for the weaker section of society. In his dramas, he represents their problems to attract the attention of all the people of the society. It appeals more to head than to the heart. The basic purpose of his plays is not to entertain, but to make people conscious of other people's suffering caused by imperfection or flaw in society. His famous plays are The Silver Box, Strife and Justice. All right. So different people were writing for different sections of the society. Different people were exploring different themes that kind of were tugging at their heart. Right. So then we have Victorian novel. Now it produced 2 great novelists, Charles Dickens and Hardy. So Hardy was a pessimist, and Charles Dickens is super important for UGC NET. I cannot comprehend why those people are obsessed with Dickens, but they are. So make sure that you know all the works of Dickens by heart, and make sure that you know the summary, the characters, the chronology. Very important. Please go through this. Super important. Now, the spirit of revolt is much more intense in the fiction than the poetry of this period. Okay, interesting. The most prominent novelists of the periods are Charles Dickens and Thomas Hardy. Yeah, Dickens is the great novelist. He makes a minute study of the whole mankind. He presents lively picture of human society. So he was a realist by nature. Almost all of his works are super lengthy, full of unnecessary, I would say, So of course, major characters are too many, and unnecessary side characters are also too many. God knows why. So David Copperfield is a representative novel in the sense that it throws light on the prevailing conditions of Victorian society. It is a social document that brings to light miserable conditions of boarding houses, women's education, child labor, and social injustice. He was a social thinker working in the line of a social reformer. Hardy's best novel is Tess of D'Urberville. Thomas Hardy published this novel in 1891 with a subtitle, A Pure Woman. So subtitles again are very, very important in general for UGC NET and other exams. Also prefaces are very important because majorly all the major works had prefaces written by other major scholars or thinkers or writers. So prefaces is also one thing that you could do. They are often asked. Thomas Hardy published, this is done. So, Tess of the D'Urbervilles is a young girl who's raped by Alec D'Urberville. She gets pregnant, but the baby dies. Quite a common theme during those days. It raises a question how such a woman may be called a pure woman, but Hardy proves it. She later falls in love with Angel Claire, but he deserts her. Alec assures her that the Angel would not come back. Her family starves and she becomes a mistress to Alec, but Angel comes back and Tess murders Alec and spends a few moments of love with Angel before she's arrested to be hanged. Okay. Pre-Raphaelite poetry or pre-Raphaelite brotherhood is also important. The pre-Raphaelite brotherhood is also known as the Old Raphaelites. It was a group of English painters, poets, and critics founded in 1845 by Dante Gabriel Rossetti, who reacted against the artificiality of the art of that period. They wanted to. So a question could be asked from this: who were the writers of? Not just the writers, who were the group members of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, right? So he reacted against the artificiality of the art of that period. They wanted to return to the purity and simplicity of the Italian art of the 13th and 14th century before Raphael. There were 7 members in this brotherhood. The pre-Raphaelite defined themselves as a reform movement. They were influenced by the ideas of the art critic John Ruskin. Okay, so basically, I did my master's from the UK, like one of my masters from the UK, and my university was named after this critic, John Ruskin. So my university was called Anglia Ruskin University, which was in Cambridge, right? So we had this gallery in particular, arts gallery devoted to Ruskin. So make sure that you go through this gentleman as well because he is also super important. So who considered art as a way to react to the ugliness of modern urban life? The main characteristics were fidelity to nature, sensuality, use of non-industrial materialism, re-evolution of medieval religion and legends. The main representatives were Dante, Rossetti, William Morris, Edward Jones. William Morris created the arts and crafts movement, so basically all the movements in general during history have been kind of interlinked with just give me a moment. I am losing my battery. Yeah, let me connect it to the charger. Yeah, so I was just saying that all the movements as well were very, very important when it comes to arts in general, like and all the reform movements in the history, the society, in the politics. All of these things are super linked and were found there, and they had found their reflections in the literature as well. So we can't read literature in isolation. All the peripheral resources and information is also very, very important. So yes. William Morris created the arts and crafts movement, which designed and manufactured a great variety of objects for interiors, stained glass, wallpapers, tapestries, rugs, etc. They used handicraft and simple decoration in reaction to industrial machinery. So this was their mouthpiece of protest, so to say. The pre-Raphaelite movement influenced the aesthetic movement. It originated in France following the ideas of Ophelia Gautier. It was a reaction against the materialism and the strict moral code of the bourgeoisie. Aesthetes were not interested in political and social matters but isolated themselves in a world of beauty and art. So, majorly, there were all kinds of people. There were people who were just interested in the beauty and art and truth and literature, and there were people who wanted to change the world, bring all the reforms and protest and changes in the world. Their motto was art for art's sake, which meant that art does not have any moral aim, but it's an end in itself. The followers of aesthetics movement led an unconventional life full of sensations and excess. They wanted to be different from the working masses, and they also rejected the Victorian moral values. The main representative in Britain was Oscar Wilde. Happens to be one of my favorite writers of all time. So he was majorly gay, and at that point of time, it was very difficult being gay because it was a crime, and he was dating a gentleman who happened to be this really high class person. He held really high stature, and the man that Wilde was dating had a father who did not like Wilde, and he kind of told on Wilde, and Wilde was then subjected to all forms of abuses, and he was incarcerated, and a lot happened to him. But then by that point of time, he had created such amazing pieces of literature, really seminal and marvelous craftsmanship. So the naughty 90s, so the last decade of the 19th century is characterized by naughtiness. Victorianism is a complex collection of several values, and the revolt of the 90s against Victorianism is also quite complex. This revolt has 3 points. First, it repeats the old revolutionary formula of liberty, equality, and fraternity in a new setting. Secondly, it worships power and beauty, and thirdly, it challenges the older value of art and life. In the literature of the 90s, 2 distinct tendencies are exposed: the pessimistic tendency and the continental tendency. In the poetry of the 90s, we consider Robert Bridges and Hardy as representative poets. The most prominent novelist of that period was Thomas Hardy. The last years of the 19th century witnessed a dramatic revival. The most vigorous drama of the age was concerned with social and domestic problems, and was considerably influenced by Ibsen. Okay. Have you read Henrik Ibsen yet? Have you read The Doll's House or anything of that sort? Your views?
A Doll's House is one of my favorite plays, and it's also I think it must be in IHE, like it was in my course, both in my UG and PG.
You were
It's
from TSS, right?
Yes.
Great. Okay.
I said IHE because this group was like IHE based, nicely. But it is in BSS as well, and it's a feminist drama. It revolves around this character named Nora, and it was one of the earliest like feminist dramas. In fact, its ending was so controversial at the time when it was. You must know this already, though, I'm sure.
Yeah, it had 2 endings. Yeah.
Yes. Because people were very scandalized by like a feminist ending. I won't spoil it for people who have not read it though, but it's a wonderful social drama, obviously. Yes.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Yes. Anything else to add? Anyone? Okay, yeah. So this really amazing happens to be one of my most favorite dramas of all time. So this is called The Doll's House, and this was written by a Norwegian exceptional playwright, Henrik Ibsen. Please make sure that you do read this, because in fact I've written a few papers as well on this particular play. So so it had 2 endings, and I'm not gonna give out any spoilers. I would like you to read it. It's amazing. Where were we? Yeah. So Oscar Wilde's plays have the tone of social criticism. Shaw is doubtlessly the greatest of all dramatists of this period. Okay. Now, Victorian compromise in Tennyson. As I had said earlier, this is a very important term. Victorian compromise. So it's a combination of the positive and negative aspects of the contemporary issues of the Victorian era. It is well known for its enrichment of knowledge in science, expansion of empire, and growth of economy, conflict between the science and religion, conflict between aristocracy and democracy, and whatnot. So basically all the conflicting ideas of the spectrum. All Victorian writers in some way or other gave expression to these conflicts. Consequence, some of the Victorians clung to the old faith and condemned the newfangled opinions. Others went over to the side of science, and still some others tried to draw some sort of compromise between the two conflicting forces. So just like it happens in the contemporary society as well, there are people who subscribe to the to one extreme of the canon, and there are people who subscribe to the other extreme of the canon, while there are people who have, I would say, neutral or conflicting views, so they just kind of are suspended in the middle. So that is also fine. So all kinds of people were there as well, and that's what was Victorian compromise. So Tennyson was kind of the mouthpiece of the Victorian compromise. Tennyson can be classed with the third group, the one which stood for what is called the Victorian compromise. The problems of the day are wonderfully depicted in the writing of the poets of this era. Poets like Arnold of 19th century started to hold a very pessimistic view about the Victorian crisis. He seems to express only a negative attitude towards his contemporary age, but we see quite a dissimilar attitude in Lord Alfred Tennyson. Unlike Arnold, he expressed a compromising attitude to his age and its intricate problems. We find in his Ulysses, all right, the Lotus Eaters. So both these works are very, very important. Ulysses basically was written by James Joyce as well, and Ulysses was written by Tennyson as well. So these kinds of questions are asked as well. So you take a really famous title and you ask that it was written by whom, and often they would give you pairs, because just because it's just one famous title doesn't mean it cannot be written by two people or more for that matter. And of course, the genre could also change. So one could be poem, other could be a novel. So take that into consideration. The Lotus Eaters, the Charge of the Light Brigade, holds such a sort of view which is supposed to find a middle ground. He's neither too melancholic like Arnold, nor too optimistic like Browning. He tries to portray in his poems a real and clear picture of the problems of contemporary society in an implicit way, because things are not so black and white. Things are often gray, and that is also something that should be reflected in literature. In fact, the poem The Charge of the Light Brigade, which is based upon the Crimean War, describes the marvelous courage of the British soldiers and pay homage to them. In his political opinions, Tennyson shared the views of an average Victorian who believed in the golden mean, a compromise between democracy and aristocracy. He believed in slow progress and shunned revolution in the field of sex. The Victorians permitted indulgence in sex but restricted its sphere to happy married life. Tennyson reflects the spirit of this age in his love poems by pointing out that true love can only be found in married life. Quite debatable, often not true, and conflicting views. In Tennyson's The Lady of Shalott, we are introduced to two young lovers walking together in the moonlight, but we are at once reassured by the statement that these two lovers are lately wed. Okay. All right. Yeah. So we are just about to be done. In the Victorian age, there was a huge conflict occurred, especially because of Darwin's theory between science and religion. All right. So everything was going fine. People were fine with religion and church being the head of the state. And then we had this gentleman walk in who kind of altered the course of literature in particular, because, okay, are you aware of what he had written? Charles Darwin? Yeah. What was it?
Yeah, I had written on evolution. I've forgotten. On the origin of species.
Yes. So this question has been asked multiple times in UGC Net and in just give me a moment. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So this question has been asked multiple times in UGC Net and often in pairs, right? And often the date and chronology has been asked. So Charles Darwin had written The Origin of Species back in 1859, and really, really important, and majorly the gist of the work by Darwin was that survival of the fittest, right? So basically, the one who's the fittest survives, which also essentially means that the one who's able to adapt more is able to survive everything, right? So that was essentially the gist of that work, or the crux. So after this work in particular, everything had changed. People had begun to question everything. People had begun to question the church in particular, because church earlier was the head of the state, and then eventually it shifted to the ruler or the monarch being the head of the state, because often a lot of people who were the bad apples of the society would take the help of church and do their bad deeds, all forms of abuses for that matter, especially financial abuse, and kind of subjecting people to misery, especially poor people. So then people had begun to have questions. People had begun to kind of doubt everything, and then everything was just topsy-turvy. Everything had begun to kind of change, and there was a lot of reforms that were going on, and majorly after Darwin. So Darwin suggested that humans are actually originated from the apes. This struck the orthodox and moved the faith of people in religion, what was contemporarily coming forward by the writings of then thinkers. But Tennyson himself was too greatly affected by the development of science to remain an orthodox Christian, yet still but not so much affected as to turn to an unqualified agnostic. Because of quality to look for a middle ground, Tennyson is considered as a compromising craftsman who does neither yield to the crisis of his age nor possess a carefree attitude towards the problem, rather keeps compromising and finding a solution. All right. Okay. So now I have for you a little quiz of sort. Okay, so what was the timeline for the Victorian period in England? Okay, great. So that's the correct answer. It was 1837 to 1901. Who did Queen Victoria succeed? All right, what is it? A, B, C, D. Who did Queen Victoria succeed? So basically, yes, D is the correct answer. So King William the Fourth. By succeed, we mean the person who was ruling the throne before Queen Victoria. Okay. Yeah. So the correct answer is Queen D. Sorry, option D, King William the Fourth. Now, Victorian age stresses on what? So often at times, MCQs would be like these nearly identical quadruplets. And by that, I mean all the answers would look like they are correct, but we have to choose the most appropriate one. All right. Okay. So yes, the third one, what's the answer for this? D is the correct one. So yes, Victorian age stresses on morality in particular. Then we have the role of the women. Obviously, the context is Victorian literature. So what was the role of the women? Yes, correct. So they were not the rulers of the house, not the slaves of the house, not the demons of the house. They were the angels of the house. This was a very popular phrase of that time. So angel of the house. In fact, okay, now next question. Yes, was commercialization of the institution of marriage part of the Victorian framework? Okay, so that is also correct. Yes, it was, because women practically had no financial rights, so they had to depend on the man, and a man of large estate. So yes, it was a lot of commercialization that was going on. So if you recall, all the Victorian like majorly the Victorian cinematic adaptations, they majorly focus on the institution of marriage, and women just worried about finding a mate, and their parents also finding a mate for themselves. Yeah, which one was a characteristic of the Victorian period? So, okay, yes. And can you recall who was the writer who wrote majorly about realism? Are you able to recall? I had told you in the class today. Yes, Charles Dickens was a realist writer. He would talk about all the common issues of the common people. Great. Okay, next. Name two great Victorian essayists. Okay, amazing. So it was Carlyle and Stevenson, because Woolf was, she was majorly a novelist, but also an essayist. But during the modern period, Shakespeare was not an essayist, if I recall correctly. He was also not from this era, and Carlyle and Goethe. No, so it was Carlyle and Stevenson. Please make sure that you go through the works of Carlyle, the chronology in particular. Then, yes, name two great Victorian dramatists. Okay, Shaw and Galsworthy again. Okay, all right. So this was it from my side. I hope you had a little bit of fun. I hope you were able to grasp a bit of Victorian literature. I hope you had a good time. I had a great time. Thank you for being a great audience. I'm looking forward to more lectures with you. In case you have any doubts, please feel free. And yeah, I am about done.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, can you share this PPT with us so that we can refer it while
Yeah,
studying?
most definitely. Yes, I'll do that.
Ma'am, I would like to invite Nidhi to deliver the vote of thanks.
Yes, sure.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Nidhi Bangre, and first of all, I extend my warm thanks to the Department of English IEHE and all the members of the Eklavya Club for organizing online lecture for UGC NET preparation. Nextly, on the behalf of all the students, it's my privilege to extend a heartfelt vote of thanks to our esteemed teacher, Miss Angela Qureshi ma'am, for their invaluable guidance and support throughout this session on the topic Victorian drama. Your clear explanation, structured approach, and constant encouragement have made this session smoother and more insightful. Once again, thank you so much, ma'am, for your time, wisdom, and motivation. We are truly grateful for your commitment and we look forward to learning more from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nidhi and Nuria, and all the people who had joined in together. Today, I had a great time, and I hope you had a good time as well. I'm looking forward to more sessions, hopefully offline sessions in particular, because that's going to be so much fun.